Hello, my name is Edmund Lauder. I'm a laryngectomy, a speech pathologist, and author, publisher of the book Self-Help for the Laryngectomy. This tape was produced to help laryngectomies produce esophageal speech. It is a vocal extension of my book, and it is my wish that both the book and this tape will enable you to acquire your new voice. We know, of course, that reading about esophageal speech production and hearing about this technique on tape is not the ideal method for providing speech therapy. But if a qualified teacher is not available, then these sources of learning can serve a useful purpose. You may have difficulty in clearly understanding my esophageal voice at first because your ears must become attuned to the different pitch of my voice. I can assure you, however, that the longer you listen to this tape, the better you will understand my voice. Another reason for a possible difficulty in understanding taped esophageal voice is that you do not have the opportunity to observe my lips as I speak. This is why it is so important for any laryngectomy to exaggerate his or her lip movement when speaking. Okay, let's begin. The majority of laryngectomies learn to produce sound for speech with what we call the injection method. This simply means that we create enough air pressure in the mouth to force back with the tongue and inject into the esophagus. When this happens, the esophagus expands and vibrates. The vibration produces sound, which sounds very much like a belch at first. But as it is developed, it becomes more and more like a deep-pitched voice. Many young boys and some girls learn to do this at an early age. They learn to make an artificial burp, which sounds like this. They do this by pushing air back into their esophagus with the tongue. Some say they swallow the air and make a belch-like sound. When you were young, could you make a burp or a belch this way? Can you remember how you did it? Remember, it sounds like this. If you can produce this kind of sound, you are already on your way to esophageal voice. What you must do now is to repeat making this sound over and over again until you are confident that you can do it every time you try it. When you have acquired such confidence, you must take in more air to produce a longer sound, like this. After this, you begin producing single-syllable words, such as counting. 1, 2, 3, or say the alphabet. A, B, C, and so on. From here, you progress to multi-syllable words with each injection of air. As you practice, you will develop your ability to produce 3, 4, and more syllables with each air injection. Okay, so much for those lucky people who remembered how to produce the esophageal sound in their early years. For those of you who never developed this ability, let us try another method for increasing the air pressure in your mouth so that the air will flow into the esophagus and create sound. There are certain sounds which, with the help of your cheeks, tongue, and lips, help create sound. These are called voiceless sounds. I like to use, as an example, the word scotch. Now listen as I say this word. I'm not using my voice at all. I'm merely producing the voiceless sounds from the word itself. Listen. Scotch. Scotch. See, no voice, but there is sound, isn't there? Now you do it. Say the word scotch. Do this again and again. Scotch. Scotch. Okay. We are producing the word with voiceless sound. Now the next step is to say the same word, but this time I want you to gargle the last part of that word, like this. Hear that gargling sound? You try it. Let me tell you a secret. At this point, the letter S in the word scotch is what puts the tongue into position to start pushing the air back into the esophagus. So now, with a big S sound, remembering to try to gargle that sound, let's say the word again. Scotch. Scotch. It is important for you to keep in mind that the air coming from the stomach has absolutely nothing to do with the sounds we are trying to produce in the esophagus. So if you are getting this kind of sound, scratch, 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 you will know you are not doing it correctly. Think only of the sounds created by your cheeks, tongue, and lips. The air from your lungs has nothing to do with it. Now, let's try another word. Let's try the word church. We can say it without voice. Church. Church. Apply the same instructions I gave you before. Exaggerate the sound of ch and gargle the last part of the word like this. Church. Church. I suggest that you stop this tape and produce these words to see whether or not you are able to get some esophageal sounds with them. Scotch. Church. Okay. Now try the word tie. Tie. Remember, a big T sound. T-I-E. Tie. Gargle the rest like this. T-I. T-I. You might try a series of T sounds first, like this. T-T-T-I. Okay, stop the tape. Try it on your own. Remember, do not try to say the word with air from your stomach, like this. It is important that you remember this. Try the word cupcake. Cupcake. Exaggerate each syllable. Cupcake. Cupcake. Now gargle the last part of that word. Cupcake. Cupcake. Then you find that the sound sounds like this. Stop, because that is not the esophageal sound. Then I don't want you to proceed in that direction. Try other words, such as oak, pocket, up, and so on. If you develop even a little esophageal sound with these words, then practice them over and over. The idea is to loosen up the esophagus so that the practiced sounds become easier and easier. Then try other similar sounding words. If you have my book, you will find them in the first series of exercises beginning on page 115. Esophageal speech is hard work for the beginner. It requires hours of practice. I advise my pupils to practice not less than 2 hours every day, even more. Not all at once, of course, but 15, 20 minutes at a time, but not less than a total of 2 hours every day, with no excuses either. All right, let's get back to work. If you were not successful in producing esophageal sound with the methods I have described, do not become discouraged. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it may be necessary for you to repeat the exercises over and over again. Remember, in the first part of the tape, when I asked you if you remembered how to create a belch. Okay, now if you can't remember it, or if you could never do it, let's discuss the mechanics of how this is done. You already have air in your mouth that can be used to create sound. You can prove this to yourself by puffing out your cheeks. Do this now. Puff out your cheeks. If you poke your cheeks with your fingers, you can force out a puff of air like this. Do that again. Now listen carefully. You only need half the amount of that air in your cheeks to create sound, just by swallowing that ball of air back into your throat. I use the word swallowing because no other word seems to be able to describe this motion. Technically, it is not a true swallow, but we won't go into that now. Let me repeat. Puff out your cheeks. Release half the air. Swallow the rest. If you do this correctly, you will hear and feel a soft thump in your throat. I'm going to make that thump now and hold the mic close so that you can hear it when I swallow the air. That sound you hear before the is the air going into my esophagus. Listen again. As soon as you hear that thump in your throat, open your mouth, pull in your stomach muscles that try to produce that ah sound. Let me demonstrate it again. If I swallow a ball of air, if I hear it thump in my throat, if I then open my mouth, pull in my stomach muscles, then say, ah, listen. Ah. Ah. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm making that thump louder than you ordinarily would hear. Practice this again and again till you are getting the air down. You will eventually produce a real belch because some of that swallowed air goes to the stomach. Now, if you do get the real belch, don't waste it. Say something with that sound. Anything. Your tongue can help you produce the esophageal sound by forcing air back into your throat, by raising your tongue to the roof of your closed mouth. As you begin to swallow air, you can create enough pressure inside your mouth to help push it down into your esophagus. One way to describe the movement of your tongue is to think of it as trying to say the letter K with your mouth closed. Try that. Remember, when the air enters the esophagus, you should be able to hear as well as feel a soft thump. This is an important signal that you truly built up enough pressure in your mouth to force the air back into the esophagus. Now, when you begin to produce that first sound, keep at it for a long time until you can do it every time with confidence. Now, with that odd sound, you can say single syllable words such as 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Then try the alphabet. A, B, C, and so on. You will learn to inject more air into your esophagus as time goes on, so that you can begin to produce words of 2 or more syllables with each injection of air. You know, words like quiet, today, country, teacher, scotch tape, cat scratch, kitchen match, and so forth. Pretty soon, with practice, you'll soon be saying, how are you? Thank you. Excuse me. Now, let me describe the method for producing the esophageal sound called the inhalation method. It is sound produced by air which is drawn into the esophagus by a quick intake of air into the lungs. With your mouth open, take a quick sniff of air into your lungs. If the air in your mouth is drawn into the esophagus, you will hear and feel a click as it does. When the air returns to the mouth, it will vibrate the walls of the esophagus and produce the ah, which can be used as is air vibrated by the injection method. without realizing it. Many laryngectomies use both methods of air intake when they speak. Remember, a quick sniff of air with an open mouth. Then say ah, like this. Ah. 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 Now don't you worry if you can't hit sound with this method, because only about 1 of every 25 laryngectomies can get the air into the esophagus with this method. And so we have discussed 3 methods for producing esophageal sound. Do not be discouraged if you are not able to get sound right away. Play this tape over and over and try to get the esophageal sound with at least one of the methods. You must work at it. And once you obtain even the slightest esophageal sound, do it again and again until you develop your ability to prolong the sound so that it can be used for speech. Remember, 2/3 of all laryngectomies learn a form of esophageal speech. 1/3 do not learn, and many of them use an artificial larynx for communication. Some use esophageal speech at home and an artificial larynx on the job. Let us briefly discuss the artificial larynx. The most commonly used instrument is made by the Western Electric Corporation, a subsidiary of the Bell Telephone Company. It costs about $50, and it sounds like this. And this instrument is operated by 2 batteries and is called an electrolarynx. Actually, many laryngectomies use it while they learn the esophageal speech. We can think of it as a crutch. The instrument is held flat against the neck and produces understandable speech. I mentioned that we can think of it as a crutch. For example, if you sprained your ankle, you would use crutches to get around while it got better, right? All right. Well, the same principle applies to your voice. Since you are without voice, and it takes considerable time to develop the esophageal voice, why not use a crutch, an artificial larynx, while you learn the esophageal voice? Now, I am well aware that many people, and this includes laryngectomies as well as doctors and others, take a dim view of the speech aid. But my position is that it doesn't make sense to be forced to remain silent if you don't have to. True, the speech aid does not sound like the human voice, but it is a means to communicate. Then isn't this what it's all about? So, if you have a need to communicate without delay, for example, if you are self-employed and must return to work, I suggest that you consider using an instrument while at the same time practicing your esophageal voice. There are several instruments on the market, and a complete description of them can be found in my book. Okay, on to another subject. Let's assume that you have acquired the esophageal sound and are making progress toward connected speech. There are several pitfalls that you should be aware of. One of the most important is the tendency to speak too rapidly. That is, beyond your capacity to create sound. Most new laryngectomies do this. When we had our normal voice, most of us spoke rapidly. Now that we must speak with esophageal voice, we try to speak at the same fast rate, and we just can't do it. When this happens, we run out of gas and cannot complete words and phrases. Also, if we try to speak beyond our capacity, we may develop stomablast in the process, which interferes with our voice intelligibility. Now you know what stomablast is. I demonstrated it before. I'll do it again. The air from the stoma brought up by the lungs. We don't want to do that because people will simply not be able to understand us when we speak. Notice the way I'm talking to you now. I do not usually produce more than 3, maybe 4 words with each injection of air. Sometimes less, sometimes more. But each phrase is limited to the amount of air I injected for it. This was most difficult for me to learn. And I hope this advice will save you some of the same difficulties. I would say that learning to slow down your rate of speech is as important as acquiring sound itself. I know that this isn't easy. After all, you have spoken at a fast rate all of your life, and now you must learn to change your speech delivery to half speed. It is a difficult task, but it can be done if you work at it. Another difficulty is tension. We become so uptight that we can't produce sound every time we try. In the beginning, we really expect too much from ourselves and become tense and thereby interfere with progress in our newfound ability. And so my advice to you is don't be so hard on yourself. If you produce good sound, fine. If you don't, try it again. Be patient. And as you practice, you will slowly improve. I recommend that each new laryngectomy tape record his early efforts in sound production. Then put the tape away. Whenever you feel discouraged and feel that you are making no progress, take out that first tape and play it. You will be amazed with your progress. Most of my pupils ask, what can be done to increase the volume of their voice? I have learned from experience that we should not be too concerned with low volume. Most of us have this problem. And my advice to you is, 1, speak as clearly as you can. 2, exaggerate your lip and mouth movements. 3, maintain eye contact with the person to whom you are speaking. 4, and perhaps the most valuable advice, stay out of noisy places. Several of my friends have purchased speech amplifiers to use in their car or other noisy places. I find that this is just too much trouble, so I do not attempt to speak beyond my ability. There is another consideration about voice volume. Most of us are at an age when our hearing becomes less acute, less sharp. This also applies to members of our family, friends, and others in our age group. If we keep this in mind when speaking to these people, we will concentrate on our exaggerated lip and mouth movement and eye contact to get our message across without trying to strain and increase our voice volume. Finally, there's a matter of dentures. If you wear false teeth, it is imperative that you use them in practice, because without them, you cannot generate sufficient air pressure for sustained esophageal sound. Not only that, but the lack of teeth will interfere with the proper articulation of your words. So, keep them in your mouth. If they are uncomfortable, get them fixed, because they are an important part of the speech process. It is my sincere desire that this information will be of value to you, and that you learn to speak clearly and without effort with esophageal speech or with an electrolarynx. If you have any problems that you can't seem to resolve with regard to your speech, I urge you to drop me a note and explain it as best you can. Then believe me, if I can help you, I will do so gladly. I leave you with a key word. The key word is practice. 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 Good luck.
The material contained on this tape is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced in any form without the express approval in writing by the author.